Take away the rifle, take away the body armor, the boots, the radio, everything modern warfare depends on. Strip a soldier down to nothing but his bare hands and whatever he can find on the ground. Now place him across from your ancestor, a hunter-gatherer who has never seen a gun, never worn a helmet, never heard of a supply chain. Who actually wins that fight? Your instinct probably says the soldier, obviously, because modern training feels superior in every way. But the deeper you look into human physiology and combat psychology, the less obvious that answer becomes. You'd assume centuries of technological progress translated directly into physical superiority, more knowledge, better equipment, structured training programs. Surely that adds up to a stronger, more capable body. But strength and capability aren't the same thing as raw survival conditioning, and that distinction changes everything once the guns are gone. Start with endurance, because this is where the assumption falls apart fastest. Evolutionary biologist Daniel Lieberman has spent decades studying human physical evolution, and his research reveals something almost nobody expects. Humans are, pound for pound, among the best endurance athletes on the entire planet. Not because of modern training methods, but because of ancient hunting strategy. Lieberman's research on persistence hunting shows that early humans could chase prey animals for hours, sometimes literally running them to exhaustion in extreme heat. Using a combination of sweating, upright posture, and sheer stubborn endurance that most other mammals simply cannot match. This wasn't a rare skill reserved for elite hunters, it was baseline survival. Your ancestors' bodies were built by generations of exactly this kind of punishing, sustained physical output, day after day for their entire lives. Compare that to a modern soldier. Elite, disciplined, extraordinarily fit by any reasonable modern standard. But that fitness was built across a training cycle measured in months or a few years, inside a structured program with rest days, recovery periods, and controlled intensity. Your ancestors' conditioning was built across an entire lifetime, with no rest days built into survival itself, no recovery periods when a hunt failed or a threat appeared unexpectedly. Researcher Hermann Pontzer, who studies energy expenditure and physical activity in modern hunter-gatherer societies, found something that stunned exercise scientists when it was first published. Groups like the Hadza in Tanzania, despite walking, running, digging, and physically laboring almost constantly throughout the day, burn roughly the same total daily calories as sedentary office workers in industrialized countries. Their bodies had adapted so completely to sustained physical output that it simply became their baseline, not something requiring extra energy or noticeable strain. That adaptation matters enormously in a fight with no weapons. A gunless confrontation isn't decided in the first 10 seconds. It's decided over minutes, sometimes longer, and minutes of sustained physical exertion favor whoever's body treats that exertion as normal, not exceptional. But endurance alone doesn't win a fight. Strength, technique, and tactical awareness matter too. And this is where things get genuinely complicated, because the two combatants bring completely different kinds of training to the table. A modern soldier trains with deliberate structure, hand-to-hand combat drills, repeated technique, specific holds, specific strikes, refined through decades of military research into what actually works under pressure. That structured knowledge is a real advantage. Your ancestor never learned a formal grappling technique. He never drilled a specific disarm maneuver against a knife attack. What he did have was something harder to quantify, but arguably just as dangerous. Total physical improvisation under real stakes, developed through actual life or death encounters rather than simulated ones. Military historian John Keegan, whose work focused heavily on the psychology of combat throughout history, observed that formal technique tends to break down rapidly once a fight becomes chaotic, exhausting, and unpredictable, which almost all real fights eventually do. In that chaos, raw adaptability, the ability to read an opponent's body and react instantly without overthinking, often matters more than perfectly executed technique learned in a controlled training environment. Your ancestor lived inside that kind of unpredictability constantly. Every hunt, every encounter with a rival group, every unexpected animal attack was combat improvisation under genuine stakes. That's a form of conditioning modern training struggles to fully replicate, because you cannot simulate real consequences without actually risking real consequences. Here's where the comparison gets genuinely fascinating. Pain tolerance. Modern soldiers train hard, but they train within careful limits, monitored by medics, structured to avoid unnecessary unnecessary injury because losing a soldier to a training accident defeats the entire purpose of training them. Your ancestor had no such safety net. Injuries happened constantly, and there was no choice but to continue functioning through them because stopping often meant starving or worse. That relationship with pain, treating it as an obstacle to push through rather than a signal to immediately stop, is a psychological trait that's genuinely difficult to train deliberately. It tends to be built involuntarily through repeated necessity, exactly the kind of necessity your ancestors' entire life was built on. None of this means the outcome is a guaranteed win for the ancient warrior. Modern soldiers bring real advantages that shouldn't be dismissed. Structured technique matters. Tactical thinking matters. A soldier trained specifically in hand-to-hand combat has studied leverage, joint locks, and disarm maneuvers your ancestor never encountered because those techniques simply didn't exist yet. If the fight came down to a single, clean, technical exchange, a well-trained modern soldier's specific knowledge could absolutely be decisive, but a real fight rarely stays clean. It gets messy, exhausting, and unpredictable almost immediately, and that's precisely the environment your ancestor was conditioned for every single day of his life without ever calling it training. So who actually wins? The honest answer is that it depends entirely on how the fight unfolds. In a short, technical, controlled exchange, the modern soldier's structured training likely gives him a meaningful edge. In a prolonged, chaotic, exhausting confrontation, your ancestor's lifetime of endurance conditioning, pain tolerance, and real stakes improvisation becomes a genuinely serious advantage, one that's easy to underestimate simply because it doesn't come with a certificate or a training badge. What's most interesting isn't really who would win. It's what this comparison reveals about your own body right now. You are the direct descendant of someone built for sustained, punishing physical output as a baseline condition of existence. That capability didn't vanish just because modern life stopped requiring it daily. It's still there, dormant, waiting for demand that almost never comes. Elite endurance athletes and special forces units today are increasingly studying exactly this kind of ancestral conditioning, not to glorify the past, but because it turns out your body was quietly built for a level of physical resilience that most modern lifestyles never come close to testing. The soldier's structured training represents deliberate human engineering at its finest. Your ancestors' conditioning represents something rawer, older, and in its own brutal way, just as sophisticated, built not in a facility but across every single day he woke up and simply had to survive. Take away the rifle, take away the technology. What's left standing across from each other isn't brute versus machine. It's two entirely different kinds of human excellence, each shaped by exactly what its world demanded, and neither one as clearly superior as you probably assumed when this video started. If this kind of deep dive into human nature is something you enjoy, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment below with what surprised you most, and I'll see you in the next video.